In our conversations about AI, data, and digital transformation, we often focus on strategy, on vision, and on the cutting edge of what's possible. But what happens after the strategy is written? What does it really take to deliver on those promises? Day in and day out across global teams and complex client relationships. Today, we're taking a crucial look at the other side of the coin, the world of operational excellence and the human engine that powers it. My guest is Chris Ellis, the CEO of GDC Services, an international IT services provider. He has over 25 years of experience leading large-scale multinational technology delivery, including growing a global delivery center to 1,800 people. He's not a self-proclaimed AI guru. He is a leader who has spent his career in the trenches, focused on the fundamentals of building teams, fostering culture, and creating a reputation for quality and reliability. This conversation is a masterclass in the foundational work that makes all innovation possible. If you are a leader who needs to move beyond the hype and actually get things done, this episode is for you. So, please join me in welcoming Chris Ellis to the Anaya algorithm.
Thank you, Magda. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Chris, with over 25 years leading international IT services and successfully building a global delivery center of 1,800 people, your perspective on what it really takes to deliver is incredibly valuable. In your email to me, you candidly mentioned that as a non-technical leader, you're also navigating the hype around AI. I think that's a reality for so many leaders. How do you, as a CEO, filter the noise and stay focused on the foundational IT services that create real value for clients today?
Okay, and thank you for starting from that point, because I was a little alarmed, first of all, when you invited me to join an AI podcast, when I'm from a non-technical background and struggling as much as everyone else to make sense of it, to work through all the noise and all the hype. I guess, and the noise I get as CEO of a relatively small, it's like 120 person company here in Serbia, it comes from different directions. So we have our own teams who were thinking, we need to create something, we need to make something, we need to be an AI company. We're more of a IT services company, specialized in IT services. Excellence, good technical skills, that kind of area. So we have our people's expectations. Then anyone I speak to with a marketing background or sales say, no, we need to say we're AI, even if we're not, because if we don't say it, then we're missing out. And then actually it comes to customers as well. And customers often I'm speaking with CIOs. So they're getting pressure from their board of directors who don't really know what they want, but they're ready to invest in AI. And these are CIOs who've been often starved of investment for years in what we used to call digital transformation 4 or 5 years ago, moving to the cloud, those kinds of areas. And just from a societal perspective of the amount of different views you get out there in terms of the noise just in media, generally that it's going to bring the end of the world, there'll be no jobs anymore. I actually saw somebody mentioned me the other day, a Gartner survey, which asked all IT companies, of all the redundancies you've made over the last 12, 18 months, how many were directly caused by AI? And AI, they said, was a factor in 1% of those, which shocked me as well.
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of that, I think we came to the conclusions that as a relatively, we don't have huge funds for investments. And sometimes when I've been in large companies before, they have the ability to, okay, we've got lots of clever people. Let's give them something else to do. Let's create something in a lab. And then you've got lots of different people globally, all doing those interesting things, which is good from a motivation perspective, but generally doesn't lead to much at the end of it. So we really need to focus on just with the technologies we use as services, where and how can we use available AI from those leading vendors just to improve our services, and then speak about that to our customers, speak about, we sort of help set up the fundament, the basis, the foundation, if you like, for then other specialist companies to come in and drive the AI on that. Because without the infrastructure and the data and the services and the processes properly in place, which is stuff that we can do, none of that really works. So to avoid going into saying that we're an AI company, but pointing out where we can use AI to improve our
Yeah.
services, quality, or cost points.
I'm glad you said that. It's a message our audience needs to hear because the conversation is so dominated these days by what's next that we forget that world-class execution of what's now is the foundation of everything. It's, the data steak we always talk about, not just the data sizzle, because the sizzle is like the AI and yeah, the steak is the meaty part, is the foundational part. So let's talk about building the teams that deliver those services. Many leaders are considering a global delivery strategy. From your perspective, what are the critical business drivers that should lead a company to say, yes, it's time to build a nearshore or offshore capability?
I think it basically comes down to each your own company, your own business case, and your own plan. And when you get to the point where you can see that your capacity to grow or even sustain your current delivery, be that product
Yeah.
development or ongoing services, is constrained by only staying within where you are, then that's the time you should at least consider moving outside. There are costs to having more distributed delivery, and there is complexity to that. And it's not really the case 10, 15 years ago. We could say, well, people in India get paid X% of what they get paid in UK, and it's just purely cost arbitrage. Those days are gone. I think now it's a question of where can you find access to the right skills, the right people who can manage those teams, and there's different pros and cons about where you go. But basically, I think it's a question of, yeah, when you realize you need to take that step, when you realize you can't continue just on your home delivery. So for some, because we often work with IT companies in somewhere in Western Europe who need additional skills, so they already have delivery. And lots of those companies make a virtue, if you like, out of the fact that everything is delivered from, let's say, the UK. And it makes sense. And so things like real like customer support, speaking to end users, like where there's a real local customer interaction, like consultancy and certainly sales, and then that is often the best thing to have. And then it builds for a lot of these companies a good sort of brand, a good sort of loyalty, the local region. If they have local government work, local delivery is often important. So it's a question of I think, you know, doing the preparation then if you think what kind of support you need. So is it just people to help and assist with what you're doing now? It's more flexible, it's more scalable, etc. Having somebody else to take some of the commercial risk around that, because it's difficult to build up teams using contractors. Let's say in the UK is expensive. Actually building a bigger and bigger team means you've got risk then of underutilization. So it's a way of sharing those risks, as well as there is still an element of margin improvement in it, and sort of understanding yourself, what's my long-term goal in this? What am I looking to achieve? And then trying to work out, well, is it best? What kind of approach is better? What kind of support or work do I want to bring in from outside the country, and how do I want to manage it?
Awesome. Thank you. So once a leader decides to go global, they face a big choice: build their own team or partner with a company like GDC Services. What are the key questions a leader should ask themselves to decide which path is right for them?
I think, yeah, it's quite a big topic, but I think
Yeah,
it depends on, firstly, size and scale. So if somebody is just doing some specific kind of work and just needs a hand, two or three people from time to time, then in that case, and you think you need sort of senior experienced people who can manage themselves, who know what they're doing, in that case, maybe just have, and people who are willing to work as freelancers, then in that case, you wouldn't need to think about setting up an operation and how is it going to be managed, all these legal requirements. But if it's something more than that, if it's delivery teams and delivery of an outcome, then you're right. Lots of companies think through. Some companies have some sort of company policy that they don't
yeah,
outsource, they only own everything themselves. Others are more flexible and they don't want to own everything themselves. I've met both kinds of companies in my time, and I think the option of setting up your own capability, it takes much more of an upfront investment. So it's not just establishing a legal entity. That can be relatively straightforward in most companies, but it's really having the team locally to manage that entity, all the legal and financial risks, to do the recruitment, people who know people in
yeah,
in that place. A lot of the certainly cities in Eastern Europe, people tend to know each other and have good contacts and know who can give advice about things. So you would really need to invest in that team on day one. And then you would need to sort of start to work and holistically really looking at, okay, well, it needs to build some sort of an image locally, some sort of campaign, how to attract the right
yeah,
people, what are we saying, how are we going to manage the people? So sometimes companies think, well, I've got 20 people in whatever Stevenage, I'll just add 10 in Belgrade and everything is
yeah,
fine. But how much management you need locally and all the things of local ways of working, etc., which are different to what you're used to in your home site. So if you want full control, it's really quite a big investment up front. And if it's a small amount of people, I would suggest it probably isn't worth doing. It's better
yeah,
working with a partner. If it's a big thing and it's long term, then ultimately the benefit it brings is you keep all of the margin and you have full control over everything. So if those are your main things, your main drivers, then setting up your own local entity is better for you. To go with a partner is it can be more flexible. You can bespoke what kind of services you need. So the split between, I'm thinking more about service provision, but it's the same for
yeah,
product division. So
yeah,
some roles you definitely want next to you physically and next to customers. Other roles you want coming from your nearshore, offshore partner. So you've got more flexibility to design that. Find a partner that's good at working at either saying, it already does what you do. And you could
yeah,
just buy like a services outcome from it. You don't need to get involved in managing the people and the teams and hiring. Just tell them, look, I want this volume of this service. And as long as you're aligned on what that outcome is and how it's measured and how it's governed, then that might be the best one for you. Or there are teams that could just do, companies that just do the hiring. So they just hire, employ people, but this handing it over to you to do all of the management. And obviously the sweet spot will be somewhere in between the two. But with working with a partner, you have that ability to do that, find the right partner. And there's even options around sort of BOT options, which people often speak about. I haven't seen it done that often where, you get a partner to build it and operate it, and then at some point in the future, you would take it over at a
take it over.
pre-agreed
Okay.
cost and time. So it's partnering is much more flexible, but you need to enter into a partnership with somebody you trust and need to go in with your eyes open and understand what their motivation is, what you're trying to achieve, and have a governance that can manage that.
Awesome. You've elaborated on this so well. I didn't even know what BOT is. If I can summarize, I think one of the key points is the flexibility and the speed at which you can be on the ground running when you go with a partner. And you rightly said it's about trust as well, getting the right partner to engage with. And one thing we talked about just before our podcast was the advantage of, for example, GDC being located nearshore. And just a couple of hours from UK is Serbia. So it's really well located for any business in Europe without needing to have that complexity of building something your own, which normally takes time as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's often a balance between obviously Serbia and Eastern European is less of a cost and differential to Western Europe, although it's still valid, it's still there. But you will find people who have worked on international projects before, worked for the big companies. A lot of time, a lot of the big IT service providers have swept into these countries and hoovered up lots of people, sometimes then scaling back. So there's good people
Yeah.
with good skills available. It's easy to get on a flight, and it's a European culture. So it's relatively straightforward to integrate teams, to integrate people. It doesn't feel alien to people, especially who are not used to working internationally. Whereas there are cheaper cost points further out in Asia, but then there's generally more things that you would need to manage and different kind of services. Things If things can be done completely remotely and completely scripted, then the lower cost point would make more sense. And it's constantly changing the situation, and there's also geopolitical considerations and
Yeah.
considerations of language. So, because obviously outside UK, German, French, other Nordic languages are important, and you may be able to find coverage of those if you stick to Europe, whereas moving outside
Yeah.
is more problematic.
Awesome. So we're going to go into the art of the partnership now. You have decades of experience negotiating complex multinational partnerships. What's the secret to structuring a truly mutually beneficial relationship with a delivery partner? And maybe what are some common mistakes companies make in those negotiations?
So I don't think there's any silver bullet. I can only sort of explain what's worked for me and what I've
Yeah.
seen fail. And some of this will sound maybe a bit obvious, but I think a lot of it is about just finding the right partner up front, and it's about understanding yourself, your short-term and long-term objectives, what you're looking to get out of the relationship and how. And then when you're looking for a partner, finding one where you can see that their objectives and ways of working fit with yours. It's not just a sale cycle. So sometimes, when you go through like RFP, that kind of cycle, you're almost driving suppliers to tell you what you want to hear. And that can sometimes drive like a sales kind of be able to say, yes, we'll worry about the details later. Whereas if it's really a partnership, then you really need to understand, okay, well, what's the company's overall strategy? How are they trying to achieve that? Do they have good references? And just what's the feel like for dealing with them? So I think that's something that most people would say, but it's often overlooked, especially truly understanding yourself, what it is you're trying to achieve. And I think the second thing is having the right level of people involved in some sort of governance structure of it. So shouldn't just be driven by KPIs and metrics. It should be in some way, you know, have strategically what your side is trying to achieve and then monitoring yourselves against that down to the operational things. And if that can engender some sort of openness and honesty, then when things change, and things do change, especially I see in large companies, you might be dealing with people who are great people. We both understand each other, but then their bosses change, policies change, people are under pressure to do different things, and everything changes. So you at least need to have the right atmosphere and the ability to have those open conversations. Then you've got some chance of dealing with those changes later on, rather than seeing it all, all, all collapse through some different kind of change. Because as I said, we think things need to be flexible to adapt to changes now, and it's difficult. Becomes even more, maybe I'm sounding too much my age now, but things seem to change even more quickly these days than they used to. Yeah, and you do need flexibility. So what's a good location now to set up a delivery center in 4 or 5 years might not be the case. So some level of flexibility needs to be built in as well.
I completely agree with you in terms of that need for flexibility. And I guess there's also a point that we can build on from there, which is building that reputation for quality. So when it comes to quality, in your previous organization, you've had an outstanding reputation for quality and reliability, leading to continuous contractual renewals. That's the holy grail. What were the operational disciplines or cultural values you put in place that made that reputation possible?
Well, it's certainly the holy grail because everyone knows winning new business is extremely difficult. There are no longer sort of 5, 8 year contracts out there. Everyone needs flexibility to change. So building that reputation is certainly. And in the particular setup where I was working at that time, it was mostly around flexibility. It was mostly around understanding partner and customer needs, making the time and effort to understand what they are in a generic sense as well, outside of just the services you're delivering, and always trying to, if you like, adapt to those needs and understand what they are and understand where the customer is coming from. And I think it was that flexibility, and also looking at their alternatives and what can we offer which their alternatives don't or aren't able to offer. So it was that, and then again coming back to governance, so having the proper relationships at all the levels, having is sort of, it's a bit boring sometimes, it can feel a bit laborious sometimes, but having the proper reviews, making sure that people attend the reviews, don't just attend when it's a crisis, and having all that structured in a way that your own teams then feel confident in what you can deliver. Having said all that, I think maybe those were all good things to aim for, but that was a reflection of what we needed to do in the particular space that we were in. So there was often tension, with creative tension, if you like, against the need to standardize, to need to make everything the same and repeatable, the need to not to be so flexible because it's more difficult for the operation. Then you've got less
Yeah,
sharing, you manage the knowledge. So all of these things are also important. It was a question of where do you find the right balance between the two? Because having too much flexibility is just chaos then, which you can't manage. And sometimes when I think back, was maybe we gave a bit too much away there. We should have said no earlier. And telling the customer or doing what the customer wants you to do isn't always the right thing. So
I know.
that's answer your question, how we managed to build that. And it
Yeah.
was real how we managed to build that. But it doesn't follow that that's the right approach to everything. It's the balance between the two and finding that right balance and what's needed
Yeah.
to be able to sustain the business, I guess.
When you talked about governance, I just realized, yeah, you've just given us a masterclass right there in operational excellence. It sounds like, the core principle is that trust isn't a slogan, it's a deliverable. It's built through consistent, reliable execution over time. That's a lesson that applies whether you're building a data center or an AI model.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So let's talk about the people, you know, that culture, which I
Right.
know is a passion of yours. So, how do you build a cohesive, high performance culture when your team is distributed across different countries, languages, and time zones?
Okay, that is quite a difficult question. When I saw it, I was thinking back through, I'm sure I've sat through training courses of how to build high performance teams, and I couldn't tell you a thing that they told me now. So it's a bit of a, I mean, in terms of internationally, then I think I've always loved working internationally and working with different nationalities and seeing how differently they work, and they then get to learn about your teams and the countries where they're from. So I think you need that sort of curious internationalist mindset in the teams. So most of the people who was working in where I was leading at the time would say that was a big benefit for them. They get to sometimes travel to these companies, but to work with the French and the Danes and the Germans and the Finns, people need to have that kind of mindset for themselves, that kind of openness as prerequisite to make it work. Then I think it's a question of, well, how do we engender different teams and delivery units to feel some shared ownership for the end result? So obviously they need to feel some shared ownership for what they're delivering, but then they need to see themselves as working together with other units who they've never visited, they've spoken on Teams or whatever, but they can't feel the same level of like they're really in one team. And all big multinationals spend a lot of time saying we're one team, we're all in it together. But it just comes down to just sloganeering sometimes. And how do you actually make that work together? So there are things you can do about encouraging
Yes.
communication between the teams rather than saying, no,
Yeah.
you're just a unit, you're not paid to think, you're just giving us an outcome, you don't need to worry about that. To try to involve people in the teams, to get their input, to make them feel as if they have some influence over the end-to-end result, and there's some way engender good cooperation between the teams. Having said all that, I could think of plenty of instances where I couldn't get there. There was always some kind of rivalry between certain teams and somehow a lack of feeling some. It's a bit like a big family sometimes where they have different children. Everyone thinks one is the chosen child, others
Yeah.
are always being told off. So it's certainly not any utopia. And I guess I'm just giving how the ways in which approach I had with my team was trying to overcome those barriers. But it is a constant battle. People will always feel closer and more feel more loyalty towards the people they see every day in their own
Yeah.
team, and getting them to open up and understand, no, it's something much bigger, and you should look upon people who are sitting in a different legal entity in a different country doing something different in the same way. So it's a constant challenge. Yeah. And in other companies, I've seen it's much more centralized and top down, which to me seems alien, but what the hell, those companies are very successful and it works and people know their role and everything is
Yes.
very structured, and they're saying everything should be the same everywhere and the output should be consistent, and in some cases that might be more important than having this sort of more internationalist collaborative work. And so it depends. I'm not suggesting the way I've worked on it in the past is the right way for every situation.
But you definitely nailed it without realizing. And you made a point around proximity, and I think it's a really vital point to iterate, in my view, being that, of course, there's the advantage of if you can visit the site more frequently or much easier, it's great. And also the ability to have these regular, sync meetings and kind of still bridges that, distance as well.
Yes, for sure. For us, it was because we were part of an international network within one big company. But for us, what was gold dust is when the end customer would come to us to visit, because that end customer had teams in our unit, but also in other units of the country. When they came and talk about their business and the new car they were manufacturing or new fridges or whatever, it really made things much more real.
Yeah.
People could really then feel the impact of the service, because often people are
Yeah.
just managing the database or doing third line support. Somebody don't really feel, well, actually, because I did that, it meant that all that load of cement left the plant
Yeah.
in Dublin on time. So that doesn't cost a huge amount of money, but it's that I always found was really key to get people properly engaged and feel some ownership.
Yeah. I love that because you've just said something important. That awareness of how what they've done has led to a particular impact to be made for the client is really powerful, isn't it? Because we like to be rewarded not just by, income or salary, but also the knowledge of what your action has led to. It is rewarding as well.
It is, yes, that's a good point.
Yeah. That's great. I'm going to go into your proudest achievement. I'm sure there are many, but you've shared that your one of your proudest achievements was the highly exceptional high levels of employee satisfaction and retention you achieved. So in a competitive tech market, it's amazing. What was one specific leadership principle you followed that you believe was key to that success?
I think this was quite a difficult one to pinpoint one thing. But I think it was on a personal level, just not trying to be something you're not. So being yourself and employing your own style, obviously trying to find ways to adapt and improve that, but being part of a team where you've got a balance of different people with different personalities. So we had in the team people who were very big on processes and KPI
Yeah.
libraries and these kinds of things. Other people who were much more around discipline and ensuring productivity. So it was, as well as everyone obviously playing their own functional role, we were able to support each other and rely on each other and provide some sort of a balance within some kind of overall culture and personality. So the team understood how we work generally. I mean, all of the employees, but it wasn't too much one way, because then the weaknesses you have, all of us have as individuals, become too sort of glaring. And I just thought of something this morning, actually. Somebody who used to work for me then, he's working for me again now. He said he was shocked when he went in to start to work for us. This was about 5, 6 years ago. He said it felt like a communist company. Thought, well, that's terrible. We didn't have gulags. We weren't centrally planned, everything down. He said, no, the way that there was people could approach your manager's manager and just ask a question. And if you had things to contribute, everything was quite flat and quite open, which sounds a little bit
Yeah.
new worldy, and it sounds like we were just doing what leading edge software
Yeah.
development, which we weren't. But that was the sort of open and transparent atmosphere that we had. And he said that was quite a marked contrast with a lot of much more hierarchical companies that he had
Yeah.
experience to that point. So that made me feel quite proud of what we'd
Yeah.
achieved when I hit that.
Yeah. So being relatable and having that open door culture was definitely one that had a positive impact. And again, it leads us to that conversation around trust, isn't it? Because people feel um, safe in a space where they feel heard, and that leads to trust. Your bio mentions a belief in fully open and transparent understanding. Can you share a story where that commitment to transparency was tested and how it ultimately led to a stronger relationship with the client or your team?
I don't think there's a particular story as such. It's just I can remember one thing I'd learned earlier in my career is once you start to sort of embellish things or try to hide facts, this is in terms of client relationships, then it becomes more and more difficult to retain that. You've always got to think back in your mind of, oh, well, 2 weeks ago I told him this, and now, so it's within that context, and it's extremely difficult to manage. And I worked with a sales guy at that point who always used to explain things from his point of view as a supplier. Well, the reason that's difficult for us is because of this and this. And you can't really argue with that. He's just explaining the facts. So I always try to apply that and however good reputation, there's always issues in delivery. There's always some, maybe not a crisis, but areas for improvement and get well plans, all of this jargon, which people in service delivery know about, is we always try to actually explain things how they are and how we're driven and be open about issues that we have, rather than trying to, I don't know, just get to a target they asked for and letting other things slip. That because if we didn't do that, then people, customers, all people, they tend to make up their own versions of the truth. They have these sort of conspiracy theories. And when you hear some of those, you think, well, that's terrible. That's far worse than what it actually is. So why don't we just tell them what's actually going on, So, and then that sort of engenders then the right approach within the team. So we would often be much more open explaining what issues are than other parts of the company we were we were in, and that did buy us trust. Trust is a scary word in commercial relationships, and we've got supplier and customer. It's always a scary thing when they say, "Oh, there's no trust," and you don't really know how to address it. So that's how we tried to address it. And again, then coming back to this thing about having a balance in the team. There are times probably when I could have a tendency to be too open, especially in like sales cycles where that isn't always the right approach. And some customers want the master slave kind of relationship. So that's where it could rely on others to whom that kind of game, if you like, would be better. But yeah, how we engendered that sort of level of trust and reputation was through that level of openness, basically trying to explain everything. While it might not be interesting to you or convenient for you to know, but this is actually what's driving us and what we need to address, and then have a conversation about it in that way.
Absolutely. That story highlights the human element of technology delivery. It shows that even in a world of complex contracts and the SLAs and all of those pieces going on, business still needs and still moves at that speed of trust. That's
true,
a
yes.
core belief we share as well at Anaya Group. Yeah. So for the CEO or CTO listening right now who is about to embark on building their first global delivery team, what is that single most important piece of advice you would give them before they start?
I would say sort of be prepared. So do your preparation, understand what you're trying to achieve, what you're comfortable in managing in terms of levels of complexity, what you're looking for from a partner in terms of value add, other than just finding people and paying them from a legal entity. And there's lots of information out there about, what are the advantages of disadvantages of certain countries or certain locations. There's often some sort of, tax benefits or incentives from governments to come in, because a lot of these governments want to keep their highly skilled technical people within the country. Yeah. So there's a lot of preparation, homework to do, and also just to get a feel for the countries, and certainly choosing the right partner. It's difficult because once you get into multinational things, you get a lot of stereotypes and stereotypical issues. The problem is some of them are true, but some of them aren't. And it's constant sort of learning for all of us to understand, okay, well, maybe I believe that because that was my experience at some point in time. Other times, no, it is generally a cultural thing that you have to overcome. So, yeah, just do preparation and be open to it, and go into understanding what you want, what risks you're comfortable in managing. And yeah, I think that's probably a bit too long-winded for one sharp piece of advice, but it's what comes to mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. This has been truly a masterclass to operational excellence, and your advice on building a global delivery team, working with a partner offshore, nearshore, has been really helpful, really empowering. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Magda. And thanks for not asking too many difficult questions about AI. Made it a lot easier.
Thank you for giving us I would say, come back to real life kind of conversation, because AI is getting all of us into the clouds and we really need to come to the foundation. And so you've done that for us, bringing us into that space.
Good.
A huge thank you to Chris Ellis for this incredibly grounded and insightful conversation. What I find so powerful about Chris's perspective is that it reminds us of a fundamental truth. No AI strategy, no matter how brilliant, can succeed without a foundation of operational excellence. The principles he shared about building a culture of trust, about creating a reputation for reliability, and about structuring true, mutually beneficial partnerships. These are the very things that determine whether a technology vision becomes a reality or remains a slide deck. So this is the how behind the what. It's the work that happens when the hype fades, and it's the most important work of all. To learn more about Chris and GDC Services, please visit the links in our show notes. And if you are a leader looking to build your own intentional strategy for technology and leadership, you can learn more about our frameworks at Anaya Group by visiting anaya.org. Until next time, keep leading intentionally. Thank you.